Hello, Internet! This is Quest Clear Cast Episode 4. My name is Owen, and today I'm here with quite a few people today. We have Arden.
Hello.
We have Brian.
Hey, what's going on? How you doing?
New to the show, we have MB, or Mike.
Hey, play Xenoblade.
And we have Evan.
Hello.
Alright, we are going to be talking mostly about video game OST stuff today. Basically any stuff that we like, things that we find interesting about it. And whatever, we have, that's actually why we got Mike here, because he knows a bit about stuff.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a musician. That's apparently means something. But yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
You're the closest we have to a professional at this moment.
Yeah.
I mean, they tell us at uni that we are considered professional musicians, so...
Excellent.
I mean, that's an honor.
Very much
Awesome.
so.
Alright. So, I guess let's just get started with whatever... we didn't really have a really good starting point here, but we can ad-lib it.
I think the first thing we start with is like, what is our preferences in terms of video game OST in specific? Because
Xenoblade 2.
I
Yes.
mean, if you want to take the easy answer, yeah, any of the Xeno games have great OSTs. But I'm talking more like what type of musical styles? Do you like rock? Do you like electric? Do you like the more atmospheric, immersive type soundtracks? Do you like chiptunes, etc.?
Yeah. See, I think if we're going from this angle, we can talk about how I feel like every video game kind of needs its own sense of style with a soundtrack. You can't just go, oh, a director can't go to a composer, or they can, but they shouldn't, and say, oh, I want this epic soundtrack to sound like this other soundtrack, because then it doesn't have a sense of identity. Of course, the composer needs to be a composer, but...
Persona 1 Remake.
Mm-hmm.
For people who aren't aware, the original Persona 1 OST was like super atmospheric and super dark and matched the tone of the game. And then when they remade it for PSP, they made it sound like Persona 3 and Persona 4, which is not how that game is supposed to sound.
Okay.
Oh man,
I can imagine.
that's
Then-
weird.
Yeah, in that certain cases like that, then you got musical dissonance, where just because it sounds great in another game in the series does not mean it would fit in this particular game that has a different style and mood. Like, I would not want Skyward Sword music, for example, in Majora's Mask, as an example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that Animal
So-
Crossing would fit Doom wonderfully.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It reminds me of that musical edit someone did where someone played Jump Up Superstar in the tune to Doom 2016. Because of the fact that Doom was coming to Switch. And the thumbnail was literally Mario's head photoshopped onto Doom guy's head with blood splatter on his face.
Awesome.
I would no joke watch a Doom playthrough overlaid with Animal Crossing music. That sounds wonderful. And like
It does.
and Animal Crossing sound effects, like every time you shoot, it's like the slingshot sounds.
Actually, we can
make
extrapolate. We can extrapolate from that topic. Do you think there's an example of video game OST that did dissonant music, dissonant soundtracks well, and like did it intentionally, but doesn't come off as ill-fitting?
So I think we can, like, I don't have much experience in this genre of video games, but from this, I think you could take a very close look at the horror genre for video games, right?
Yeah.
Now, you have very typical horror soundtracks, and then you have the more unique ones. Now, I don't know if any of us are actually familiar with horror games. I'm personally not familiar at all, but
No,
this is
unfortunately,
mostly based on what I've
I'm
been
not really that
told.
familiar
this
with
is
them.
unfortunately more not to my expertise, since I don't play much horror games. I'm only vaguely familiar with some of them. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can define horror as like a bunch of different things, but I think I know what you're talking about, like what I would call cute and cuddly horror, where like there's like happy-go-lucky stuff in something that's clearly not meant to be like cute and cuddly or like happy or whatever, like something that's clearly
I think from that description,
So like
the-
Doki Doki.
yeah.
Doki Doki is actually a real good example, but another indie example I think of is a game called Eve. IB. Have you heard of it?
I have heard of it, haven't played it.
It's
feel
not-
like I've heard of it.
It's a game made in RPG Maker, but it's not actually an RPG. It's more like an action adventure or horror type game, and it's bizarre. And actually, I don't know if it has any examples of dissonant music, but because all the feel good stuff plays in like the more of the peaceful times. So
All right. Well, we're getting a little off topic, so let's
we
kind
are
of bring this.
getting a bit off
Let's
topic.
bring this back. So that's. I guess that was just like our 3-minute opinions on dissonance.
Yeah, dissonance that could potentially work in video games.
I think there's some merit to dissonance in games that aren't in game soundtracks that aren't you wouldn't typically expect dissonance in, because dissonance generally adds a layer of tension, right?
Right.
And if we're going from a jazz perspective, it's all about creating tension and not really letting it resolve.
Yeah.
And I think there are some soundtracks that do that really, really well. And I'm going to call out one of my favorite JRPG battle themes, Sophisticated Fight from Trails in the Sky. Now, I'm not in the position to like do a proper theoretical analysis of it, but when you have a lot of chord extensions, right? The more you add to a chord, in terms of, I guess the easiest way to explain it is adding more notes to a chord, up or down from the bass, the root of the chord, and that creates more tension. And what jazz music, and especially in video games, does really well is it especially for a battle theme like Sophisticated Fight, it keeps that tension by not really just by keeping chord extensions for pretty much every chord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember like I went to this last PAX West. I went to the video game music theory 101 panel, where they talked about it was Adriosaurus, Family Jewels, and I can't remember the third guy's name, but it was really good. It was really good. But they were talking a lot about like how different progressions and stuff like that influence the catch and release type thing in music. And
yeah, if you want any song to sound epic, you got to abuse that flat 6, flat 7, 1 chord progression. Because that's what Sawano does all the time.
Just as a quick aside, those same guys also made the soundtrack to Caves of Hyrule. So
yeah, I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, which
but
is
I've been watching.
very nice.
Mm-hmm.
I watched them far before that ever happened. Started watching them like years ago, but
I don't really follow much of Family Jewels, but all I know is that he made this amazing ad-lib April Fool's joke of Through the Fire and Flames.
I know that he. Side note: I know that he put he ear-tuned Megalovania onto his doorbell.
Oh
yeah, he also did All Star.
Yeah,
he does a lot of great stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, on the topic of Megalovania,
we are getting a bit.
Emmy, go.
Yeah.
Emmy, go for it.
But yeah,
on the topic of Megalovania, now I still haven't played Undertale, but there's something so iconic about Megalovania, and you hear it, you just hear da-da-da-da, and you know that's Megalovania. I saw someone posted an image of like, you know, those like piano synthesizer tutorials you see on YouTube, and you've got like the green notes that go into the piano as the music goes on. Someone posted a screenshot of the first 4 notes of Megalovania, and just from the spacing, I instantly knew it was Megalovania. And I think that's something that a lot of main themes do. Now, I know Megalovania isn't the main theme of Undertale. The may as well should be at this stage. But a lot of main themes, what they do is they start off with some sort of really simple, recognizable interval. You hear it with Star Wars, you hear it with Zelda. Zelda's and Mario, they're all very good examples. With Zelda, you've got, I think it's 4th, right?
Mm-hmm.
That sounded really out of tune. And then it goes off into its own thing. With Star Wars, you've got yeah. And then Megalovania, you've just got an octave, right? You've got
Yeah.
and then you've got like I think that's a minor third going downwards. But because a lot of these recognizable tunes start with such easy on the ears intervals, they become much more recognizable for anyone really listening to it. So this goes for any kind of composer of video games. If they're asked to make a main theme, they generally think to start with some sort of interval or have some sort of recognizable interval in there, because that's what makes the main theme stand out as the main theme. Going to my favorite example, Xenoblade 2 also does that. You've got right?
Mhm.
And that's a fifth. And a perfect fifth is very there's a lot of maths behind the frequencies and all that, but basically it sounds nice to the ears, and because of that, it's quite easily recognizable.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of main themes do to kind of get.
Yeah, for sure. I think
Okay,
it's
yeah.
kind of like a way of
It's
saying
to
grab the
recognize it.
audience's attention, kind of.
I find it interesting that you know how to analyze Megalovania like that, because if you actually look up how Toby Fox initially wrote that piece, he described it as he threw whatever he wanted into it just to try. Like, basically, it was like the last song that he needed to compose for like his Earthbound hack. So he threw whatever he wanted it kind of into a blender and like came out with that, which is why if you look at like how the song progresses, it feels like it's like a bunch of like different like small parts like kind of linked together, I guess, but it still works really well.
Yeah.
But like it
Right.
starts off with that interval that you're talking about, and he probably did that intentionally, because Toby Fox is, before even a game developer, he was a musician. I just find it interesting, like, if that's something that you just do like subconsciously or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. I feel like simplicity is also key. You don't, to make like something memorable, you don't want it to be too complex of where you can't remember it. If you get something simple and catchy, at least at the start, then it can really get you far within like a song.
Yeah, and that's something I found being exposed to more and more classical music as I'm studying music through university. I don't. Maybe it also has to do with how I started listening to music. My main source of music inspiration was from game soundtracks. But I find, because classical music in general can be considered a lot more technically complex, and there's a lot more going on. Not saying that classical music is like better for it. That's completely subjective, and it's pretty pretentious to say that. But because a lot of the pieces have a lot more going on, they don't stick in your mind as easily unless you listen to them multiple times. Whereas game music, at least I'd say a lot of chiptune, old classic NES kind of title music, doesn't have that sort of complexity to it, especially with the NES sound chip only having really three layers that it can actually work with.
3 layers.
Yeah.
Audio channels.
Which is weird, because they had to also that's also how the sound effects came out. So they had to create songs that were spaced, so that way you like a sound effect could still come out.
Yeah, and it really makes some sort of. It kind of highlights how simplicity isn't necessarily a bad thing in music, because it's a lot easier to get into the song kind of on the first listen. Oh yeah, I know where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like another thing, another thing that game music has to its advantage is repetition, because these songs are looping all the time.
Definitely.
Like the example.
Kid Icarus Uprising.
Yeah, Kid Icarus Uprising is a good example. Another example that I think of is just like the entirety of the Persona 3 soundtrack. Like, if you listen to Mass Destruction, that song, if you listen to it,
beats love face reality.
yeah, if you listen to that song like just on your own, it doesn't sound that great. As a matter of fact, I have many side opinions from different people that they didn't like it whenever I was playing the game. But because you're listening to it over and over and over again, you actually start to really like it and appreciate what it does. So
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Mass Destruction is one of the best JRPG battle themes ever conceived.
I would
agree.
say that
Oh, dang.
a lot of songs that don't listen to themselves well, like if you just listen to it by itself, I feel like that's pretty much a lot of Pokemon games starting from Gen 3 onwards.
Yeah, well, Gen 5 had a pretty good battle theme.
It did, but overall,
Oh yeah, Gen 5 soundtrack is my favorite.
overall
for
though,
Pokemon.
I always feel like that in terms of like music, Pokemon is best if you play it with the sound on rather than try to listen on its own. Like when people hype up Zinnia's theme in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, I had it try to listen on its own. I was like, yeah, it's good, but I'm missing something here. Like, and I don't get that with a lot of other tracks from, say, like Xenoblade or Xenogears or Mario or Zelda tracks. With Pokemon, it's just lacking. If I just listen on its own.
Yeah, see, I think you raise a pretty good point. Sorry, Owen, but
Go for
I find, for me, I find video game soundtracks are best listened to in context first. Now, that doesn't go for every soundtrack. I think when I listen to a game soundtrack, right, there are three kind of criteria I kind of go through subconsciously to kind of tell myself, okay, do I like this soundtrack? Is it good for me, right? And that's, first of all, does it sound good in context? Does the music support what's going on visually and what you're doing, I guess, physically through your controller or keyboard if it's PC?
Mm-hmm.
Second, is the music good standalone, right? Because you can have, and movies, Western film have some sort of focus on making the music enhance the visual and what's going on at the moment in whatever scenario is going on, but take the movie away from the music, and it doesn't necessarily add up to something musical.
Mhm.
I mean, it's still musical, but not.
Well, like it's that's the question of whether you prefer atmospheric versus melodic, right?
And then the third criteria would just be both of those combined. And then I kind of decide, okay, I like the soundtrack.
Well, I mean, like it's interesting that you do bring that up because typically I would agree with you, but even there, like I can think of like several games that, which case I probably would not like the soundtracks unless they were listened to the context of the game, like anything Shin Megami Tensei or I'm trying to think what else, probably Octopath, probably, actually, that's a good example. No, Octopath is good, but like you need to listen to it in context in order to really appreciate it. Final Fantasy, of course. Well, with debate, because like they're most
Yeah,
a lot of the
it's
sounds.
subjective.
But like I'm just coming. I'm thinking about this because I'm just coming off playing Persona Q2. I'm still playing that right now. But leading like for like months and months leading up to the game's release, I would listen to that game's soundtrack, like specifically 5 songs, like the battle themes and the main theme, and those songs never got old for me. Like those are good songs on their own, and that might just because like I'm Persona biased, like you're used to how Persona like Shoji Meguro composes and stuff like that, and Kitajo and stuff like that. But like the question is like, is that like am I used to like the style, or is that like just good music on its own? I don't know.
That brings up
Very
an
interesting.
interesting question though. Is like, do you prefer your video game OSTs to be like fits the context first and then be good on its own second, or do you prefer the other way around?
I mean, I personally think if you have both,
Yeah, like why not
then
both?
that contributes to making like a fantastic soundtrack. Xenoblade 2.
But
I think. Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think there are soundtrack. It depends on the game, right? There are games where the focus is very much on the gameplay over the story, and I think those kind of games don't necessarily need a soundtrack to enhance the gameplay. They can just make music that, say it's a shooter, right?
Yeah.
Now, I don't see many first-person shooters with music these days, but think about Splatoon, right? This is a third-person
Whoa.
shooter. You have music in your when you're playing a match, right? 3-minute match, and sure, the music has its own style, and it works with Splatoon because of the whole, I guess, high pitched, pitch shifted voices. But the music in the background of the match is very much there to kind of get you in the mood for playing the game, rather to, I guess, immerse you in the gameplay. At least
Gives
that's
a bit
my
of tension
view.
as well when you're playing the game.
And like the
and
soundtrack
we're-
completely shifts when it gets to like the last minute or
the
yeah.
last
Mm.
Oh
minute
yeah,
shifts again.
definitely.
So
Splatoon music fits that game really well.
Which then offers in the question of like dynamic music, right? Like how
Dynamic
does a
music.
dynamic music enhance a soundtrack?
Yeah, and this is where I'd really like to bring up, particularly Fire Emblem Awakening and Fire Emblem Fates.
yeah, they fade in and out the heavier tracks once you engage in battle.
Yes.
Like,
Fates might not be a good game, but the soundtrack and the way the sound design embraces that soundtrack, although it's mostly taken recycled ideas from Awakening, really benefits it, I think.
You say
Yeah,
Fire Emblem, I'll raise up Metal Gear Rising and Doom 2016, both of which have amazing dynamic soundtracks that we even flow throughout the courses of their battles, especially in the case of
And-
Metal Gear Rising.
Yep. And have any of you guys played Faster Than Light FTL?
Faster Than Light
that-
is this
I
roguelike
have
game, wasn't
not.
it? I have it on PC, but
Is it?
is it?
It's
Is
on my
it-
bucket
Yeah.
list.
I have it.
I-
but-
Although I haven't played it, I went to a panel at PAX Australia a while back. Yes, I'm Australian. Which talked about sound design and music, what we're talking about, and they brought up FTL as a prime example of dynamic music. I don't really remember too much about the specifics of what they said, but it was a very similar concept to what Fire Emblem Fates and Awakening do with their dynamic music. Just, I think it was a lot more immersive than just kind of, oh, you're in battle. Here's a more epic version of and heavy version of the same song you were just listening to.
Yeah.
I think from memory it has different stems that they gradually add depending on the situation that's going on.
I do want to like two examples that I always love for dynamic music. The first one is the original Persona on PlayStation 1. The boss theme of that game is really interesting because the way it sets up is that it's a slow ambient track that doesn't actually do anything. But what's interesting about Persona, like the original Persona game, is that it's one of those games that you need to select the attack, like choose to fight button before you get to input your commands. So what it does is it's really cool because what it does is it's like this slow ambient theme, and the actual battle theme doesn't start until you hit the fight button. When it does, then the electric guitar kicks and it like the tempo picks up, and then at the very end, like then the track starts looping. But what's brilliant about the track is that it has many different places where it can end. So what it does is it implements an ending when you beat the boss, and it basically the electric guitar plays itself out. So like the it doesn't loop all this time to it doesn't like loop and then stop when you beat the boss. It loops and then it stops, like comes to an end of the song before it has a result screen. I love that. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, that sounds
That's
cool.
so
That
cool.
sounds cool.
From memory, I think Octopath Traveler does a similar thing with like the boss intro, like the intro to the boss music.
Yes. That's another great example.
I
And
think
then
I don't remember it being completely flawless. I remember you have before every boss, you'd have a cutscene and you'd have some music play before you get into the boss, and you're like, oh yes, we're about to fight a boss, right? And I
then
think there's a lot of games. Yeah,
and then it transitions to the normal boss theme. It's like,
yeah, and
I
it's
think-
always so satisfying hearing it, even if it's not flawless, but it's still satisfying.
yeah, it is really satisfying. The second example I want to bring up is Tetris Effect, actually, on PS4.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
um,
The
Oh,
VR game.
yeah, of course.
I love that game's soundtrack because it's a bit like it doesn't have like a quote unquote sad soundtrack because every song in that game is picks up as you place more and more blocks. So every time you move a block, you get a note, and you can get these like really weird distorted like notes that don't sound like a proper progression like at all, but it still works, and then the music picks up and picks up. So and that's an example of like I don't know,
An
I
example
just
as well afterwards.
yeah, go for it.
So
Your
Alright.
button fell off.
oh yeah, Pokemon Black has some good
Oh dear.
Oh dear.
Pokemon Black has good dynamic music.
themes with towns and stuff.
Yep.
Also, it shifts. Once the gym leads down to this final Pokemon, and when you are in the red. But I think the earliest example of dynamic music is the final boss of Final Fantasy VI with Kefka, where there's
just go for it. But like, I still need Final Fantasy 6 is next on my list, and go for it.
Fair. But what I'm about to say is that the final boss theme actually broke up into 4 parts. Each part can loop on its own, and once you advance to the next phase, so to speak, once that phase ends, it'll move on to the next part of the song, and it'll loop around, and then you finish that phase, and then it'll move on to the next part of the song once it finishes the loop, and then after the third phase, it will completely cut off, and it'll play Omen, and then it'll play the 4th part of Dancing Mad. That's like the earliest part of dynamic music in any game that I can think of.
On the topic of boss music, though, actually, I was thinking about this earlier when we were mentioning the with Octopath Traveler, how the music transitions smoothly into the boss theme. Now, while that doesn't happen too often, especially in RPGs, I find, especially for RPGs, before boss battles, when you have like a cutscene, there are sometimes games where they always play a particular track before you fight a boss. And every time it plays, you're just waiting there, and you feel like it's going to, like, at any moment, it's about to play the boss theme. And I think I feel this very strongly with Persona 4. There's a track, Border of Insanity, which plays before pretty much every major boss, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got the regular boss theme, I'll Face Myself, the battle version. And every time I hear Border of Insanity, I always think, oh, I need to listen to I'll Face Myself right after this, right?
Yeah.
And I think because the game, every time it uses this track, it's always followed up by a boss theme, usually I'll Face Myself. When I listen to this track on its own, right, as I am right now, I always hear the track ending, and then I'll Face Myself coming in immediately after.
Yeah.
And I think there are yeah,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And I think there are a few other games that do that. I think Bravely Default does something similar with one of its tracks. And I think there's a lot of examples that you can cite which have a very similar track that builds up tension towards a boss battle. And I think it's something that's done quite frequently, so I'm sure it's nothing new. But I think it's very smart to have one track kind of give the player an idea of what's coming next. Like, oh, I'm hearing this track, that must mean there's a boss battle coming next. And that means you could also subvert expectations by playing the track somewhere and then not having a boss battle. And there's a lot of breadth to what you could do with that kind of sound design in a video game that I don't think is explored enough.
See, you say that, but I think I instantly thought of Castlevania Rondo of Blood, which does that. It plays like this ominous track right before bosses.
Right, so it's like... Sorry, not Toby. Evan, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just gonna say Castlevania had such good music.
It does.
Like
Speaking of Castlevania, Bloodstained, I'm playing that right now. It's just unlocked on Steam.
I gotta play Curse of the Moon first, but I'm looking forward to it.
Curse of the Moon is also as good.
I need to get into Castlevania full stop.
Stage 8 of Curse of the Moon is my favorite track in the game. So good.
Anyway, um, uh, MB, you bring up Michael. You bring up a good point because that kind of goes into like not exactly because it's a different thing, but kind of like leitmotif. Because the thing about the song "I'll Face Myself" is that the battle theme is like the leitmotif for the entire game, right? So you got like that's used in like the "I'll Face Myself" not battle theme, where it's like the self-reflection type thing, and then it's used in Nevermore. So that brings into like how leitmotif is used. I know Yasunori Mitsuda, who composed like Chrono Trigger, Xenogears, Xenoblade 2, is a huge fan of leitmotif, and he puts it in a lot of his stuff. But yeah.
Yeah. A friend of mine and I were actually looking through the Xenoblade 2 soundtrack a while back, kind of like analyzing where all those leitmotifs were used, right? And there were quite a few tracks I noticed where they have some very subtly hidden callbacks to the main theme that I was talking about earlier, the duh duh, and this kind of ties back to the whole interval because it's that fifth interval that's quite easily recognizable to anyone who, even if you don't know music, it's just nice on the ears, so it's quite recognizable. Because even though Mitsuda reuses that leitmotif in his music very subtly, it's still recognizable because of that interval. And that's where the main theme of a whole track, a soundtrack, really ties together a soundtrack. And I think Mitsuda does a fantastic job with making the main theme really shape the identity of his soundtracks.
I was taking a minute to think about like what you meant because I thought I can never remember what I was trying to figure out what you were talking about, and then I realized you're talking about Elysium of the Blue Sky, and I remembered like I always remember the Chapter 8 dungeon. I'm not going to mention it for sake of people who maybe haven't played Xenoblade 2 yet. It's a techno remix, well, not techno remix, but it has that leitmotif of Elysium in the Blue Sky in it, in a techno like chippy kind of feel, and it's so good, and it evokes like such strong emotion because it's the longest dungeon in the game. It lasts 2 chapters.
I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, no, it's there. If you listen to it, it's very apparent. And I remember listening to
Don't kill me for this. I don't really like that track.
Okay. It takes a little bit to get used to, but it's such a good track once you get used to it.
I got to that dungeon like, and I just kind of, I think it was night, but I just kind of stopped playing and just kind of sat there for like a solid, probably half an hour listening to the music. So yeah.
I suppose.
When speaking of like leitmotif, like one of the biggest things that made me like learn about it and like just like really appreciate it was Undertale, of how like there's so much leitmotif in that soundtrack.
Yeah,
and as a lot of people might call that lazy, it's like extremely well implemented.
Because it takes effort to make a strong leitmotif that can be used throughout the game. So it's like the opposite of lazy. Look at Super Mario World. That game has the same leitmotif for the entire soundtrack.
Especially like there's
ultimately.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you go.
Oh, I was just gonna say, especially when you get to like a certain boss fight, which I won't spoil, it takes like all these leitmotifs from like different points in the game, and it just really feels like this like grandiose build-up that you wouldn't have felt just listening to the song on its own. And even if you don't
about Xenoblade 2, right?
No, Undertale.
Undertale, okay.
And even when you don't pick that up at first, it still sounds really good, and when you do pick it up, you just appreciate it like even more.
Right.
So it's just like a really powerful thing if you're able to implement those well.
Yeah,
And it's really cool.
Going back to Xenoblade 2, the Chapter 7 boss fight, which I won't say, has some really cool, like, the music in it has some really cool, like, different parts in the song that tie back to certain parts.
Yeah, okay. You're just like kind of like cutting out in and out, Arden.
But yeah, I do feel like that if you are able to tie it together a very strong leitmotif and then strain across multiple songs in your soundtrack, you've done a bang good job, basically.
Yeah, definitely.
Though at the same time, as a composer, and especially of soundtracks, what I've heard quite commonly is the idea is to come up with material, and then you don't really need to come up with too much new material because you can just have it repeat, and repetition is quite an important aspect of composition because our ears like repetition, right?
Yeah.
With game music, they have the added advantage of looping, right? But when you're talking about just general composition, it's generally these days it's encouraged to reuse ideas that you've used previously in a piece that you're composing, because it makes it really focuses in on one kind of idea and gives the piece its own sort of feeling if that idea is unique enough. And I think the whole idea of leitmotif is just kind of using that one idea across the whole soundtrack. And that, I wouldn't call that lazy at all. It's basically what composers have been doing ever since the Baroque period, or before that, really. And I feel like it's very hard to call a composer lazy if they've produced music.
Yeah.
because
To be clear, I was referring to like other people calling it lazy. I don't think it's lazy at all.
no, it
Yeah, of
is
course.
not lazy at all, and
Yeah.
it's hard making music as is. So
And like I get it, like it doesn't have to be like I wouldn't call it lazy at all. Like one of my all-time favorite things is when they take the exact same when they take a leitmotif and then they just turn it into different genres. Like I was talking about Xenoblade 2 earlier, where they take like a very kind of more Japanese classical piece into like a techno song.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, like where it's like it completely changes genres. Where like this really peaceful song can be like in okay, so like the big example I'm thinking of right now off the top of my head is I'm watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for the first time, and in part 3 there is like the main theme for the main character, and then there's like this light piano theme that plays in the background of some parts, and it's that song because it's so iconic, but it's a completely different genre. It's like one is like an action song and the other is like a quiet, like subdued song. And then like if you want, you can take any leitmotif and like remix it into rock or metal or something like that. And
Yeah.
it might work, it might not, but like it's still really impressive when it happens.
yep, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one other example, it's less genre changing, but more changing the feel of a leitmotif, and it's not. It's really just rearranging the same piece. One good example of that is Final Fantasy 15.
Okay.
Now you've got like that. I think everyone probably knows this song. I'm not sure, but Vols di Fantastica.
Bum 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 bum. Is it battle theme?
No, not the battle theme. Vols di Fantastica. The that
I
one.
do know that. Yeah, I do know that one.
I'm
And that yeah. If you don't know it, it's fine. But
They played all the promotional material.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and there's a few that. I'm sorry.
I haven't played enough of 15 because I'm sorry. I couldn't get into it.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. But there's Sunset Waltz, which is basically the same. It's the same melody, but it's written in a slower tempo, and it's used as like overworld music, which has interesting usage for Final Fantasy 15. But because they really have a very strong kind of theme, and it goes for a lot of other themes in Final Fantasy 15 soundtrack, like Somnus, right? They can safely rearrange it into different kind of pieces, even if it's not necessarily changing genre per se. It's changing feel through tempo, the activity in some of the parts, and it gives a completely different feeling, but it's still very familiar because it's got the same melody.
Yeah.
very
Like
cool.
the power of melody reuse is actually quite I mean like it makes sense in a video game specifically because like things loop, of course, but when you use it in interesting ways, I guess that's it probably works for the best.
Mm.
Yeah, okay, do we have anything else we want to talk about like on the leitmotif side?
Please use more of it because I cannot get enough of it. I am so giddy. I was so giddy when Super Mario Maker first came out in 2015. We got new music for Super Mario World with the airship theme. That was great.
Mhm.
It was literally like the world's take on the airship theme. It sounded on point, and I cannot wait for Mario Maker 2's soundtrack because that's also gonna be really really good
It's going to be a really good game.
Yeah.
and
Alright,
with a great soundtrack.
All right, the last thing I want to talk about, another thing I want to talk about is we still have a little bit of time, like 20 minutes, I think,
Yeah.
roughly. I want to talk about the presence of lyrics and their increasingly more common use in video game soundtracks.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, like, obviously, like 20 years ago, when we were all playing on, well, I wasn't born yet. When people were playing on, like the N64 and the PlayStation and stuff like that, songs with lyrics were like just starting to come out. Even before that, though, we had like SNES and NES, which didn't have lyrics at all. And so video game music kind of had this it works for movie soundtracks too, I guess. But
Right.
Video game music had this reputation for being kind of like not. I still hear it today, basically, where like people don't really want to listen to it very often on their own unless it's like Mimi or something like that, like the Me Channel theme.
Oh yeah.
So
It has a reputation of like, oh, it's all computerized, right?
yeah, exactly. Computerized, repetitive because it's for games, so it's obviously looping all the time. But I honestly couldn't disagree. I couldn't disagree more. Because I find that when lyrics are used in a soundtrack, even like in something where lyrics hadn't been used like the entire game, I find that the lyrics help make a point to how important a place is. The first thing that people should come to mind is the use of Latin choirs in final boss themes and JRPGs, which is like my guilty pleasure of all time.
I mean, it makes anything. It makes anything more epic. Not just in JRPGs. I could think of like Bayonetta. Bayonetta is amazing with its orchestral soundtrack, mixed in with its pop style soundtrack, of course.
Yeah,
Brawl main theme.
The
Yeah,
Brawl
Brawl-
main theme is pretty
Brawl main
good.
themes. Yeah, exactly.
Still the best one out of all of the 5 games.
Base to Ematsu.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I just want to finish up. But I'm thinking about this more and more because it feels like it's starting to become more and more of a norm, which I find really interesting. Because you have I mean, of course, Mario and not Mario Odyssey, it just got its first major. I mean, technically, if you want to count the main theme had lyrics for 30 years, but the one that got Jump Up Superstar suddenly got it's big. And then Xenoblade.
And then it ended with Break Free.
Yeah, and then Xenoblade Chronicles 2 brings in a new NEF for not only the traditional ending lyrical theme that is in all Xeno games, but for a lot of the town themes and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And
area themes are interesting.
and and this is just,
yeah.
Will the suffering ever come to an end?
yeah, but this is just Japanese songs. But I believe that there's actually quite a bit of this in Western tracks too.
Cuphead.
Yeah, Cuphead, yeah, stuff like that. So I'm just thinking that why do you think this has been why do you think obviously it's technology, but what do you think is going on with this? Because I don't know, but
I think at this point we finally figured out how to properly integrate them into video games.
yeah, definitely. I'm not saying
let's take some. I think the earliest example of lyrics in a game is either Xenogears or Final Fantasy VIII.
Earthbound I think had them before that.
Earthbound isn't really well the 8 melodies and all that stuff. It wasn't in game. It wasn't in game. No, it did not. It was not. I don't think. Wait, was it created with lyrics in mind, or were lyrics grafted onto it after the fact?
I think that was done for some of the songs, but not all of them.
Okay.
I can't.
Okay, because grafting lyrics onto a pre-existing song can sometimes feel really, really out of place. I feel.
Well, the Mother vocal. Let me check out when the
Yeah.
Mother vocal album was created.
Okay.
Just go ahead and talk.
Yeah.
Besides of that, we got the earliest examples of lyrics in games like Final Fantasy VIII, Xenogears, and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. that credits theme is the cheesiest type of dissonance. Period. It makes no sense why that's a thing. it's
I
I'm
need to
looking at-
listen to that
I'm
now.
looking at side note. I'm looking at this right now, and apparently the Mother CD did come out in 1989 when the original Mother game came out.
okay.
So I think it was made with those songs with that stuff.
Definitely leads more credence to the fact that they were designed with lyrics in mind. Okay, then yeah, okay. But
If we're talking
I feel like that as we progress more and more, and we use lyrical songs to punctuate a point. Like in Final Fantasy VIII, we have the song "Eyes on Me." Xenogears has small two pieces that plays in the credits. And slowly but surely, game developers are really figuring out how to incorporate them. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have cheesy lyrics like Sonic Adventure to
no, just Sonic.
Ever? Just Sonic. Period.
Just
Because
Sonic.
they all have cheesy lyrics. I love the cheese. I absolutely adore almost every single one of Crush 40 songs they contribute to in the Sonic series, but
Oh yeah,
they
definitely.
are still cheesy. You will not convince me otherwise. So I am stuck between this limbo of well integrated and just flat out embarrassing. I don't know.
Actually, if we're talking about lyrics, there's one soundtrack I'm actually gonna bring up: Nier Automata, and probably the original Nier too.
Yeah.
Now, what's quite interesting about all the lyrics, at least in the in all the songs that aren't Weight of the World, the lyrics, from my understanding, are basically made up language by Yoko Taro.
Of course.
He's a real
And-
Tolkien in
Because
that
it's
regard.
Yoko Taro.
He's a
Yeah,
real
because it's
Tolkien in
Yoko
that
Taro.
regard.
Yeah, and I think that when you talk about lyrics and having them made for a song, or the song was made before the lyrics were thought about, for Nier Automata, I don't think that actually matters because Taro would have done that anyway.
I mean, granted, but still. And I'm not trying to insinuate that there's one right thing to make a song. Sometimes you make the song first and then you graft lyrics onto it.
Mhm.
It's just that most of the time, in my experience, I always felt like that it feels more natural if the song was built for lyrics first.
I think one good example, just based on someone else's video, "Wake Up, Get Out There" from Persona 5, right?
Yeah.
While it's not really made for a game background, there's a very good analysis video on Persona 5 soundtrack by 8-Bit Music Theory. on
I've
YouTube.
seen that one, yeah.
And he talks about mode mixture, and just to spare everyone from the music nerd talk, basically the music is there's a lot of changes in harmony that really emphasize the lyrics of "Wake Up, Get Out, Wake Up, Get Out There," and I think cases like those are very inspiring because, as a composer, at least aspiring video game music composer myself, it's very inspiring to see how well crafted the music can be to the lyrics while still remaining really interesting as music alone. Because a lot of the time, when you hear music, generally the consensus is if the lyrics were made first, you'll have catchy lyrics, but the music might not be as catchy. But if you make the music first,
all of pop music.
yeah, and if you maybe,
Oh, dear.
and if you make the music first, you'll hear the melody before you hear the lyrics, and the melody is what will stick in your mind before the lyrics. And I think there's a very interesting avenue of attack like that. But with "Wake Up, Get Out There," I think it balances both perfectly.
All right,
Yeah.
that's good.
Mhm.
You
To make
brought
it
up Near
interesting, it ties
Automata.
into the themes of the games.
Speaking of that and themes, you brought up Near Automata, Michael. I would like to direct your attention to Metal Gear Rising again because that song has a bevy of lyrical songs and they also contribute to the theming. For example, I'm gonna take one of the final bosses, Metal Gear Excelis. That track is called Collective Consciousness, and it's basically talking about how uh, the weak should bow down to the strong, and we will make everything all hunky dory for you. To put it very mildly, and and stuff like theming in lyrics for stuff like that, pivotal moments in the game. I feel like that's also a very, very powerful tool to hammer in something. Granted, you're probably not going to listen to the lyrics because you're too busy not dying, but you get what I mean.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
It's actually interesting. We're talking about how the lyrics contribute to the theming of games, right?
Right.
And I can think of a few examples where the lyrics definitely don't.
Sonic.
Aside from Sonic, there's Xenoblade X. Now there are tracks that do, but what I'm talking about
Melancholia is a work of art, and I don't care what you say.
Melancholia is great.
I love how you knew what I was talking about. But yeah, Melancholia was a track made, composed by Sawano, not actually originally made for Xenoblade X. It was actually composed in 2009 for his solo music album. But I can think of a few other examples, and so the lyrics don't actually reflect the game's themes too much, but it's still a great song, and I think it works in the game well.
Please don't say it's the New LA theme. Please don't say that.
No. I'm gonna shift my focus to a different game, one that I haven't played.
Okay.
Now, I think there's both game music and also music that is used in trailers for games, right?
Right.
And I think
Zelda Breath of the Wild Nintendo Switch presentation.
Why is that not?
Hey,
in the game?
that was released on the soundtrack for the game,
and
but,
it's in Smash Ultimate.
Yeah, and what's interesting is one trailer that I watched a while back. Anthem, EA.
Oh dear.
Now, whatever you think
Okay.
about EA, right?
You have my attention.
What they used in one of the trailers was basically a movie kind of remix of a song called Uprising by Muse, right? And it was crafted to the trailer, obviously. But what I find interesting is that they found a song from my basic understanding of Anthem that kind of that's kind of talking about similar themes in its lyrics to the game Anthem. Now, I haven't heard good things about Anthem.
I think you just said the most positive thing about Anthem in the past 2 weeks.
Ouch.
Ouch.
People say positive things about Anthem?
It has good flying.
I'm just kidding. It
feel
could
so
be a
bad
very
for Bioware.
good game for all I know. I just
Yeah.
like to joke
Yeah.
around.
I don't
But
want
just-
to bash on something I haven't played, so.
Yeah, same. But I bring this up because just because a song isn't necessarily composed for a game doesn't mean it can't fit the game.
No. You're alright.
Yeah.
True.
That's a good
and
point.
that's immensely obvious with Melancholia from Xenoblade X.
Yeah, because that has like
And the 5
nothing.
seconds we hear
That
of it.
has nothing to do with the actual theming. It's like,
Hmm.
what am I even listening to?
I still love that song, and I don't care
Dude,
what you say.
I love that song too, and I would defend that song
Yep.
too, dude.
It's a work of art. I don't care.
I will also
My favorite-
even,
You know what else is a work of art?
what, the Neo LA theme?
An LA theme.
Oh, I mean, I'll also defend that. I don't get why people
Which
say
version,
that-
day or night?
Both.
Both.
Who cares?
Exactly.
I will defend those, just like how people will defend some of the janky stuff in other games. I will defend the music in X. X has a great soundtrack. Okay.
Now, X is one of those prime examples I will talk about where the music is great, but I don't think the usage of the music is perfect. I think, aside from the area themes, which are used really, really well in the game, minus the lack of looping, this cutscene music for Xenoblade X, I don't think it really fits. Like, some of the sound design choices, sound direction choices, don't really work from what I understand. Now, I'm a huge fan of Hiroyuki Sawano. Not so much these days, but because of understanding how this soundtrack actually came to be, I kind of know that the only reason vocal songs are in the soundtrack are because the director of the game, Tetsuya Takahashi, in a meeting with Sawano, kind of was like, wouldn't it be fun to have vocal songs in the soundtrack? And they just kind of did it.
Nice. But you talk about like the sound quality. I'll argue the opposite. I feel like the
Sound direction.
Direction.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But I argue that's fine. What's not fine is the cutscenes themselves.
We already had that discussion a long time ago.
We did have it, but I feel like the sound direction itself was fine. It's just that it didn't really fit the cutscenes, which are all not very good. Let's be perfectly honest.
Yeah, at that point, it's like, who do you blame?
Yeah, I don't blame them. I don't blame sound anything in that because I feel like the music, if the cutscenes itself had better production values, the music would be a way better inherently. It's just that as it is with the janky cutscenes and like just very low budget in comparison, I don't think any music would have saved the cutscenes.
Actually, no, I can see your point, because there is one cutscene that I always source for Xenoblade X, which has absolutely amazing music usage, and that's the first cutscene when you get out of I think it's when you basically get that cutscene showing you the open world, and
oh yes, it plays the
and the track Z5M20I12R04A28 plays.
Come on, Solano, just say it's a remixed version of Nocturne, okay?
That's no fun.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Z5 Mirror.
God.
But
okay, I will agree there, but that's because the cutscene itself was directed very nicely.
Oh yeah, and that's what I was gonna say. Now that you bring it up, I think because the cutscene itself was absolutely fantastic, the music worked really, really well with it.
Yeah. So it kind of comes into like a point where you need both. You can't just have like amazing sound. No, if you want to mix it with a cutscene, you need to choreograph it very nicely, and then you have to get the music working out. I feel like a great example of that is Kid Icarus Uprising, where every flight track is tailor-made to swerve and go around like all of the scenarios you'll find. Like when the Aurum invade in chapter 15, I believe, and stuff like that.
Yeah, Kid Icarus Uprising.
That game's so good.
Hot take: the controls are perfect.
No, I think it's good. It's a very much a Sakurai game.
No, the controls are perfect. If it was dual analog, you have to be aiming way slowly. But I'm getting off topic here. I don't want to talk too much about that.
I think Kid Icarus Uprising has its own very unique sound design. Apart from like menu tracks which are made to loop, and some boss themes, right?
And the ground themes. Because most chapters are basically set to a timer, right?
Right.
Because it's the flight sections, they automatically progress, and it's basically a gauntlet to make sure you don't die, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because those chapters were very much timed, the composers they could write score to the scene, essentially.
Basically, just like a movie.
Which isn't something you find too often in video games. And there are some really good examples of the music being scored to the scene while still remaining very interesting musically, which is what Western film doesn't do too often these days. Not to say that it doesn't. That's a very subjective claim, but
like personally speaking, I do not remember any music from any films, but
remember
games,
Deadpool?
definitely.
Deadpool 2.
I don't really have yeah, that's actually an interesting point that you bring up. The only thing I like when it comes to Candy Crush soundtrack, the only thing I remember is how wonderful it is hearing Spanish guitars in a song about in a game about ancient Greek gods. um,
And also, I
But,
didn't know that the Orm were huge fans of jazz.
yeah, it does some interesting stuff with like that game as a whole is like a hodgepodge of so many different experimental things, and it works so well for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Uprising is my favorite 3DS game, bar none.
Mm.
Hmm.
We haven't talked.
Sakuraba does it again!
All right, so before we start wrapping up here, I do want to bring up one last topic, and that's, of course, the eternal debate over whether about the validity of like atmospheric tracks versus like melodic tracks.
I have a lot to say about this.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so basically, Metroid is my favorite series, bar none, and a big part of that is the music. The music blends atmospheric and okay, I'm gonna cheat a bit here, but it has its fair share of both atmospheric, like purely atmospheric tracks, but it also has its fair share of melodic tracks, like that you'll mostly see in games like Metroid 1 and Metroid Zero Vision, and even Fusion. Then you go into the Prime series, which has this own set of atmospheric music that, while isn't as catchy per se, it is still pretty dang nice to listen to when you're out and about exploring the world. And especially in the case of Metroid Prime 1, when you touch down on Town 4, you are greeted with this amazing somber recreation of the Brinstar track in Metroid 1. Basically, but really, where I stand on like the atmospheric versus melodic catchy, I feel like I'm gonna cop out here again and say that depends on the game, because I'm gonna bring up another game, Breath of the Wild. People kind of rose up a stink on how there wasn't really a lot of music when you're exploring the overworld, and I would say that actually works because Breath of the Wild's overworld is a desolate, post-apocalyptic world where nature like reigns over everything else. And you only really get music when something happens or you're in a lively place like a stable or a town.
Just for the record, Breath of the Wild's soundtrack is 6 hours and 22 minutes
it's
long.
long. It's not. It's like
It's longer than Xenoblade 2's.
Anyone who says Breath of the Wild has no music should probably get ears.
Yeah. Breath of the Wild is an interesting one because I know Manaka Kataoka, the person who composed the main theme and a lot of the music for Breath of the Wild, she actually, I think I've read some online, she actually wrote a thesis on minimalism in music.
Damn.
And I think that actually makes her perfect for a soundtrack like Breath of the Wild with such, I guess you could call it typical open world soundtrack sound design, right?
Right.
But because I imagine she's quite knowledgeable about how to make music minimalistic in a way that enhances game soundtracks. Because it works really well. I know she's worked on some Animal Crossing games, and she worked on Pokepark.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wait, no, that was Manami Kyoto. Whoops. No, she didn't work on Pokepark.
Oh. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I do really love atmospheric tracks though, because I have songs like The Chosen Ruins from Metroid Prime 1 and Town Overworld, the first version of it anyway, on my iTunes playlist, and I really do love listening to these type of stuff when I'm working on projects of my own. They really like soothe the my brain and just like get me in the mood to just work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going to add on to that with Breath of the Wild, right?
Yeah.
What I find very interesting about some of the atmospheric tracks in Breath of the Wild is that even though there's a lot of silence, they still have a melody. And tying this back to leitmotifs, right?
Yeah.
The Temple of Time, the track in Breath of the Wild. Now, it's very slow, but if you listen to it closely and follow the melody line, it's the exact same melody as the original Temple of Time theme from Ocarina of Time.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah.
And I think that's something some people don't actually notice. I only noticed this when I actually started to try to learn this piece on the piano.
Yeah. Also,
Um,
Death Mountain in Breath of the Wild is the same track
Oh, yes.
from Zelda 1 as well. Well,
Yeah, it
as
is.
In, as in like level 9 of Zelda 1. I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's really nice, because I have the limited edition of the soundtrack release for Breath of the Wild actually in the booklet lists all the leitmotifs that are borrowed from other tracks in the game, from
really?
other games, right?
That's awesome.
Damn.
Yes, and it's like a really long list. It actually confirmed a few like at least Japanese titles for music that has been unreleased, like from Skyward Sword.
Oh, that's cool.
But because of that, you just look at that list, and it's such an interesting list of leitmotifs, because you look at a certain track, and it's like, oh, the Kakariko Village track actually borrows something from the Kakariko Village track from Ocarina of Time. I still don't know where they do.
I can't
but
listen.
apparently
to it.
it does.
For it. I don't see it just yet. I need it. I need to be pointed out to me.
No, I've tried to find it. I still can't find it.
Oh, dear. Okay, maybe we need some pointing out of our own then.
Yeah, but I find it.
Good luck going on a quest, guys.
But because Zelda has such a rich history in music, even though these tracks are very atmospheric in their own way, they borrow melodies from past entries in the series that make them still recognizable, probably mostly subconsciously, unless you're actually looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really enhances the kind of immersion, but I call it subconscious immersion.
Right.
Well, that like a big part of why Breath of the Wild works so well is because it's like 30 years of Zelda games have gone by, and something like that wouldn't work on like a first sequel or whatever. You'd have to
Oh,
have
of course.
a legacy in order for it. But what is Breath of the Wild other than a legacy, and also like it works? It's both a breaking of tradition and a preservation of tradition, which I think is that is Breath of the Wild basically.
Hmm.
Right. I had something I wanted to. Oh, right. I remember what I said. One major factor for me in terms of like the atmospheric versus melodic, is the pacing of the game. In something like a slow-paced game like Breath of the Wild or even Xenoblade to a degree, I am perfectly okay with atmospheric tracks. Like in Spirit Crucible Opus in Xenoblade 2, that's a melodic track I can really get down with. I love that track. But in like a 2D fast-paced game like Hollow Knight, that's when the atmospheric that's when the atmospheric music doesn't really work for me, and I don't really like the atmospheric tracks used in Hollow Knight, for example. But compared to Super Metroid, which also has its fair share of atmospheric tracks, like for example Brinstar Red Soil, it still has its fair share of like upbeat melodic tracks like Brinstar Overgrown Greens and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like pacing, like if you're really going like fast as possible, like well, as in like in terms of like game speed or stuff like that, I don't think it's good to play like an atmospheric track in something like Mario or Sonic or Metroid. If it's something like more like moderate like Zelda, then you can afford to go toe the line between like a balance of the two.
It's basically how action based the game is, right? Where it's like
Basically,
more exploratory games are going to be like have that mix between action and kind of like pacifism, I guess. But then something like JRPGs can kind of be both. But naturally, that's a lie because you'll probably need a lot more melodic if you're going to be doing the same thing over and over again. So.
But then
something like Animal Crossing, though. So.
But then you look at something like Zelda Ocarina of Time with Hyrule Field, where you're going to be traversing that place forever and ever, and eventually, even though that track can be a bit catchy, it can also get really old by the 10th hour. So that's why I'm sick of Hyrule Field at this point.
Yeah, same. I am too. Believe me.
So that's where like having a melodic track doesn't work, and that's why they went with the atmospheric tracks and stuff like Breath of the Wild. Although to be fair, other games like Skyward Sword had like intense songs when going through its own open field.
But Skyward Sword has its own.
Well, Skyward
Issues
Sword
with
has
that.
its own issues, but I don't think music is part of it.
Yeah.
But
I do.
But yeah, it's funny though when I bring up Hollow Knight because then I compare it to Dark Souls and Hollow is 2D Dark Souls. Dark Souls has like no music at all. Music only plays in like 4 areas, not in bosses, and all the bosses have their own music. Oh, okay, not all of them. Some share music, like actually, no, I won't tell them the names because they don't mean anything to people that played. Oh, even then, Dark Souls has like a nonsensical plot lore. So.
That did just remind me of one thing that like I like the like having no music. That remind like MB, you'll know what I'm talking about here. Xenosaga Episode 1. That game has it has a lot more music than you think it does, but it never plays. Because like so it's the same battle theme for basically everything, including 99.9% of the bosses. And then like there's like tracks in like atmospheric areas, but I think they were trying to emulate 2001: A Space Odyssey in terms of its like cinematography thing, but there's no music anywhere. It's all sound effects, but there's no music. I don't know. I'm not a fan of that.
Xenosaga Episode 1's interesting because I actually because I haven't played the game. It wasn't released in English outside of America, but I do have the soundtrack and I did watch a playthrough. The music is mostly used in cutscenes. There isn't much area music, and when there is, I can think of one area where it was just kind of atmospheric. The track Ormus plays.
Yeah. And Song of Nephilim too is a big one.
Yeah, but that's pretty much all I can think of. There aren't many areas that actually use music, and the areas that do are more important areas in the game compared to, say, just another dungeon you're walking through. Now, Xenosaga Episode 1 is very linear, but...
Yeah, like, so Takahashi is heavily inspired by Arthur C. Clarke, his novels, and one of his most famous novels, of course, is 2001: A Space Odyssey, which got made into a movie. And that movie, if you watch it, there's very little music used in a lot of scenes, mostly to convey like the emptiness of space and all that. And I think that works for a movie, but in the context of a 40-hour video game in which you're actively interacting with it, it feels a little bit more soulless, I guess.
Right,
Yeah.
I feel like that. Well, actually, I would say like Dark Souls is like a 30-hour game. And music doesn't play for like half of the game. Well, it depends on how long you spend on bosses, but regardless, you don't hear music in that game for like 50%.
But Dark Souls is about the bosses, right? Like I haven't played myself, so I can't.
Kinda. It's also.
I started playing it. It's not. There's a lot of not boss.
Yeah, but like the
Gameplay.
things people will remember are probably going to be the bosses,
It's
right?
the bosses and the difficulty, mainly.
Right. That's what people are gonna remember, and so it
Yeah.
uses it to further accentuate it. In Xenosaga, the things you're going to be remembering is the story, like
Yeah.
nothing else. Like the
Yeah,
game itself is pretty. Xenosaga 1, I'll be honest, it's bland to play. It's not a ton of fun to play. Story's super cool, but it's kind of bland to play.
Okay.
And because like MB, you were saying like all the music is using cutscenes because that's what they want to accentuate. But it kind of like it kind of works because the game's like 45-minute cutscenes, and then you get like gameplay and then more 45-minute cutscenes. But it doesn't still work because you're playing a game. It's not a movie.
Right.
I think this is something, especially in the Xenosaga series, that I think Takahashi struggled with. I guess not really episode 2. He wasn't even working on episode 2, but he wanted to make he was very ambitious in making a story, but he didn't really remember that he was making a game
Until Xenoblade, but
until Xenoblade. Yeah, of course. Xenogears slightly has this problem,
But that's
not
because
so much.
Thankfully, it had
That was because of Square.
Yeah, it was Square. It was
Yeah.
like making sure it was actually a game.
And Square kind of pushed for the game to be released, and then they had to cut out. At least they made the decision to cut out gameplay content to
3 discs worth. 3 discs worth they cut out.
Yeah, to like actually tell a story in disc 2.
To Xenogears' credit though, in disc 1 is much more healthy. Balance of gameplay and story stuff. So, although I would have liked it to skip the cutscenes because God, that text is so slow. But one grievance at a time.
I don't mind it. Okay. Does anyone have it? We're gonna be wrapping this up. I'll have one final thing I'll ask every person. Everyone will respond. That's typically how we end these things.
Yeah.
But does anyone have any final thoughts before we wrap up on just music in general, or any example? Like, the question I'm gonna be asking is like, I'll be asking a question about like favorite OSTs that you have, like one or two.
Gotcha.
But aside from that, anything you guys want to mention?
Honestly, I really do feel like good music is like a cornerstone of every video game, because you look at a game like Yoshi's Crafted World where some people are very split on the soundtrack. Even Xenoblade X suffers from this to a degree, and while I do love Xenoblade X's soundtrack, not a lot of people, there are some people that disagree, but basically I really do think that almost every good game needs a good soundtrack. Without that, you can still be good, but I feel like that it really does enhance it by a great margin.
I think.
Yeah.
But that said, don't expect to. Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
Okay, but don't expect to be carried. Just last Sonic.
Yeah, like,
Adding to that, I know. Sakurai himself actually said that in an interview. He's like, I don't remember the exact quote, but he said something very similar about a good game has a good soundtrack, right?
Right.
Like, a game is
I
good
find
sound-
it. Yeah, that too. I find it very interesting you bring it up because I still, to this day, I've tried 3 times, cannot get myself through Tales of Berseria because the soundtrack does nothing for me.
Oh, yeah.
I find it very bland.
Oh.
And yes, Sakuraba's great, but I don't think he did that great for Berseria. And I still can't push myself through it. And I used to say, for video games, this is my one last thing, by the way. We have, for me, personally, I prioritize story over gameplay.
Yeah.
But nowadays, I say, I prioritize story over gameplay, but I prioritize music over story.
Wow, you must really like the percent of dancing games then.
You probably like Hades Viral as well.
Yeah, I actually want to try, but I want to play Crypt of the Necromancer first.
Okay,
Yeah, same.
Fair enough.
I would have to say that for me, music is it's the most underrated, I feel, thing in video games just in general. Like, everyone talks about good story or good gameplay, but audio design and it's really weird actually, because in a climate where graphical power is everything,
right,
it's odd that audio power isn't as emphasized. I mean, obviously, like, we're getting to the point where like it doesn't matter. Where like our sounds are already very good.
Because games like Hellblade, Sending You a Sacrifice, that makes use of multi-audio channels nowadays.
Yeah.
So like with a good surround sound, you can really hear like the voices in the main character's head.
Yeah, but my big thing is just like, I'm just kind of like, it shocks me, I guess, a little bit, like how, like, we're obviously, like, I find that like whenever like people who like kind of conglomerate around a specific series, they're going to be dissecting every single part of it. But like people who are a little bit more casual to the gaming world, like, have really good music. The really good music doesn't really like play out as well. But by contrast, though, what I find interesting is that I find that the video game musicians, though, are just as famous as the developers, but not the graphic designers. And, I mean, obviously that's because graphic design is a huge work, and music is less so because you can get like 4 or 5 music directors. But I mean, like, how many people know Nobuo Uematsu, Koji Kondo, Yoko Shimomura, Yasunori Mitsuda? Everyone knows that. But can you tell me who the graphic designer was for Xenoblade 1? Can you ask me who like the art director was for?
No.
Kunihiko
That's
is
a
the
good
character
point.
designer.
Yeah, I
Oh.
just find that it kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But you
Well-
you did say like it's the most underrated part. I'm gonna bring
Yeah.
up music analogy here. Music to games is like the drums or the bass guitar to a band.
Yeah,
By itself, it's not like that. Doesn't seem that important, but you absolutely do need it to form the whole.
Yep, it's actually interesting for recordings generally, at least band recordings and anything that involves drums, the percussion is always the first thing to be recorded, and then the bass guitar, and then everything else.
interesting.
And it really drives home the fact that the drums are essential, and as you say, I think music is essential to games, and that also includes the lack of music where necessary.
Right. Some games like Dark Souls handle it decently well. I'm still kind of, I don't know. Part of me doesn't really like the fact that Dark Souls doesn't play music in most of its areas. But on the other hand, I do think other games like Zelda, Ocarina of Time, where it's like, okay, I am sick of this music now. So I guess that's where atmospheric tracks like in Metroid Prime or some of the parts in like Super Metroid, that's where they come in.
Evan, do you have anything?
I think you just pretty much made the point that I was going to say is just how underrated music can be. I think it's just really good to sometimes take a step back and just really appreciate music that a lot of good people have like crafted, especially when it's really well done.
And then Arden, if your recording will
Yeah.
cooperate.
So
Do you
yeah, I
have
was
any
just
final-
saying, I do like the stuff with like the atmospheric tracks. I really like those because those can be like really relaxing and stuff like that. But there's also like some good vocal themes as well. Like, yeah, I just love music and video games in general. It's just like what I grew up on, and plenty of stuff like I just love.
Actually, it's
Yeah.
interesting you mentioned that because I know a few years ago, my guitar teacher, who grew up in a very classical environment, was telling me that she was very surprised when she found out that there's a whole generation of people who grew up with video game music.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that very interesting as, like, that there's a whole new kind of audience for this sort of music. And yes, while it's not as popular, it's a gradually increasing audience. And as gaming becomes bigger as an industry, I think it's one of the biggest entertainment industries in the world now.
It's the biggest one right now.
It is the biggest, yeah. And the bigger it gets, the more people are exposed to video game music at a young age.
Yeah.
That is true.
Mhm.
Like I'm 17 and I've lived in a world where like music from like Mario Kart Double Dash influenced a lot, like was like my early years, and then I got to like stuff like the Wii and stuff like that, and then I got when I got really into video games, I started looking at like one of the first things I looked at was the music.
Right.
So
Basically.
Yeah.
Same here.
all right, so the last question I'm going to ask, and we're going to go top to bottom, is answer these two questions. What is one game or two that you bought solely because you wanted to hear the music? And I can think of two off the top of my head.
Okay.
And the second question is, what are one or two game OSTs that you hold particularly fondly?
Okay.
And we'll start top to bottom. So Arden, you can go first.
Okay, so a game I bought solely for the soundtrack. I don't even know.
Oh,
Probably-
Smash Brothers is not allowed.
Wait, you mean I can't? I don't get to buy the playlist that could just happens to come with a game?
Soundtrack Smash Brothers doesn't count for a game that like you can
No.
because
Fine.
it's kind of cheating. Come on.
It is cheating. It is cheating. I'm just
It is cheating.
It's really cheating.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I'd say probably some Pokemon games actually, because my very first game I ever played was Pokemon Emerald, like ever.
Mhm.
And going past that, I wanted to hear more of the soundtrack because that was like one of my favorite things about the game. So probably Pokemon Black and any Pokemon games after that, like Pokemon X, Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, such and such. Those probably just for the soundtrack, 'cause I like soundtracks mainly.
Mm-hmm.
Another like the two OSTs I hold really dearly to myself is
You cut out.
Yeah.
that game and the soundtrack itself is Xenoblade. Definitely.
Xenoblade.
One of
Which one? Just like first one?
well, I'd say all of them, but maybe
Okay.
2 and X probably. I do love those soundtracks, and 1 of course, but
Yeah.
2 and X are probably my favorites out of the 3.
Interesting. Okay.
And then the other second game you said, probably To the Moon, and like its whole series itself, because just like how emotional the soundtrack could be, and how much like emotion it holds within the songs and stuff like that. So I think I just love those two about that.
To the Moon has a really good OST.
Yeah.
Yeah, To the Moon,
it
the
does.
entire series
For real.
itself, A Bird's Story and Finding Paradise, both have some fantastic
Yeah.
compositions and stuff. So I really like those.
Thank you, kind girl.
Yeah. All right, Brian.
Okay, so what was the first question again?
What's a game that you bought just because of the soundtrack?
Oh, easy, Undertale. I was
Okay.
first exposed to that game through the soundtrack, and after listening to Megalovania once, I was like, okay, I need to play this game. That,
Okay.
legit. It was not because you could kill everyone. It's because you got this amazing soundtrack that just happened to come with the game.
I bought that game because it was at a Camp Fangamer one day, and like Toby Fox did an interview on stage about the game before it came out. I'm like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. I'll try it.
Yeah, but as for a game that I hold close to my heart, I'm gonna dig a bit obscure here. Ever heard of a game series called Ace Combat?
I have heard of
Yes.
it, haven't played
I
it.
might have.
Same.
So my very first Ace Combat game is this little hidden gem called Ace Combat Assault Horizon Legacy. That's basically like a remake of Ace Combat 2, but it's so fun, and also came with an amazing soundtrack that perfectly captures the thrills of dogfights and soaring through the skies. And I think if there's like any action soundtrack, it's that game. That game has some of the best. Period. I love that track.
Didn't I help you find like
You
the
did
soundtrack
find
release for that one a
the
while
high
back?
quality. You helped me find the high quality soundtrack. I was like, man, where's the high quality stuff? And then you pointed out to me, it's like, oh my god, I've been missing this for my entire life. Because all the other stuff I found on YouTube was like really low quality tracks. It was like, no, this is bad. But
I find that with a few soundtracks.
yeah, but the second game is Botoi Sakuraba's and a whole host of other contributions like Yasuri Mitsuda, Kid Icarus Uprising. That soundtrack, oh man, that's also another perfect soundtrack. I don't think there's a single bad song in that soundtrack at all. And you can really tell that Motoi Sakuraba helped make this due to the instrumental stuff. This could easily fit into any Golden Sun or Dark Souls game. It's that good, and it has such a fantastic melody for all of those songs that everyone contributed to. But Motoi Sakuraba especially, because I feel like that if you like translate all those songs into like Golden Sun or Dark Souls, they will fit in perfectly. And it is just so good. It is just like you can take them and then you can apply to any game that Sakuraba worked on, like Tales of Star Ocean, Golden Sun, all that stuff. Even Mario Tennis, come to think of it. But I'm not here. What about you, Michael?
Alright. So, the first question was about what games I got for the soundtrack alone. Now, I have a very interesting relationship with video game soundtracks these days. I am very much insistent on hearing it in context first these days. But if there are two games I can think of I got because I heard the soundtrack was good, and I heard that the game was good. But I reckon I was more interested in the soundtrack. Those being Nier Automata and Ori and the Blind Forest.
Okay, yeah, those are two really good choices.
Yeah. And I am very glad I actually avoided listening to the soundtrack before I played Nier Automata because it I don't know. I have mixed feelings on how it's actually used in game, but I think the music is absolutely fantastic, and I'm glad I heard it in game first. And Ori and the Blind Forest is the same. There are some tracks that I listen to out of context, but I still think it works so much better in context first, and I probably wouldn't enjoy it as much if I heard it out of context as first impression. You could also add Xenogears to that list, but I mean, I wanted that because it's Xeno.
Pretty much, yeah.
Otherwise, the two soundtracks I can say that are very close to my heart. If you don't mind me listing more than two, I will say Xenoblade 2, Bravely Default, and Pokemon Black 2 and White 2.
Okay, give your rationale.
Okay, Xenoblade 2 is just something... I don't think it's something extremely unique for the JRPG genre. It has Mitsuda and all that, and he's great. But I think while it sounds very much like the first Xenoblade soundtrack in tone, it's still very close to me just because I really needed it. I think I cannot imagine life without this coming into my life now. I don't really have much rationale behind liking things generally. I just say if I like it, I like it. Bravely Default. Yeah, Bravely Default, on the other hand, is actually interesting. Back in the days before Xenoblade X was a thing, I used to say Xenoblade Chronicles is my favorite game of all time. Bravely Default is my second favorite game of all time, but Bravely Default has my favorite soundtrack of all time, and Xenoblade has my second favorite soundtrack of all time. And the master Revo, also well known for all the Link to Horizon Attack on Titan openings he's made, is such a genius, I think. Both with music and storytelling. And only recently I've been looking into other projects like Sound Horizon that he's done. But Bravely Default was my first exposure to his music, and it's so close to my heart. I can't even describe it in words. And then Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 are just my favorite Pokemon soundtracks. I think this includes Black and White, but the sound, while I think Diamond and Pearl soundtrack is very nostalgic for me because Diamond was my first Pokemon game. Black 2 and White 2 have such a unique sound font that is so identifiable, and even if the tracks are very diverse in their sound, because of that sound font, the soundtrack has an identity, which Sun and Moon soundtrack doesn't. But I absolutely love Black 2 and White 2's soundtrack, and I could not live without it.
Okay.
I said something pretty controversial there, but that's okay. We don't need to talk about it.
Well, I think Sun and Moon has a
Sun and Moon's soundtrack is good. I don't remember.
I love the soundtrack. I just think you take the music is. There are a few tracks I wouldn't call Pokemon tracks. I think there's benefit in having a very diverse soundtrack, but there's also the detriment that it loses a bit of its, I guess, streamlined identity, which I'm used to with Pokemon soundtracks.
Mm-hmm. Alright, I guess I'm next. Alright, so games that I bought solely because of the soundtrack. Okay. First off, Persona 5 I actually haven't played yet, but I got into the Persona series because Persona 5's soundtrack was so good. So that's kind of self-explanatory. Here's an interesting one. Tokyo Mirage Sessions.
Nice.
I mostly got the game because the trailer soundtracks was really good. I actually still haven't finished it yet, but and I finally got around to playing it, and it's not a great game, but I do enjoy the soundtrack a lot. But the game is it's something, alright. Let's just say it that much.
I bought the game a while back and
I really need to play that game soon.
Let's call it sterile.
Okay.
But the soundtrack is pretty good. But I bought the game because like I wanted to like listen to like the vocal songs seem pretty good when in the trailers, and they are actually very good songs. But yeah, it's just that's the game I bought for the soundtrack, and I don't even know what I got myself into. And then one that's like not even out yet, but Astral Chain, I guess, is the big one that's around the corner for all of us.
Oh, absolutely. But I'm in for the platinum combat. I don't know about the soundtrack yet.
Well, I don't see. This is the thing. I have no relation to anything platinum. I've never played Nier Automata. I've never played Bayonetta. I've never played really anything by them. Well, actually, I played Star Fox Zero, but that's different.
Star Fox Zero is mostly Nintendo anyway.
Yeah. But Astral Chain is like the soundtrack is just. It sounds like something that I would love. That I'm just so excited to give it a try because it's platinum game. Platinum games means like Platinum Games has a reputation, but to me, it doesn't really mean anything. But that soundtrack is really good, and even if the game is bad, which it's not going to be, it looks amazing. I want to play it just for the soundtrack. And then for games that I hold very close to my heart, the one that I always point to first is the Wind Waker. It's still my favorite. Still my favorite Zelda game, but Wind Waker was the game that taught me like, hey, video games are more than just games. I remember it specifically the transition from the Sun's theme, like the da 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 when the morning song, and then it goes right into the Great Sea. That's like something that like kind of blew me away. And Wind Waker has a great soundtrack as is with some really great tunes. And that was like my introduction. I'll always hold the Earthbound soundtrack close to my heart, just because it's great, and then it's been remixed and jazzified in so many different ways, and it's honestly like it's left such a great impression on me. Like I have several remixes on my shelf of just different Earthbound tracks.
Yeah, I agree.
That's the reason why Matoy Sakurab's the GOAT. He remixed the 2 Earthbound tracks in Ultimate.
Yeah. But I have stuff from Super Soul Brothers and stuff like that. Those are great like soul jazz bands, and like they do like really good Earthbound songs. I just really like it. And then third, this will be the last one that I had on the top of my head, and I seem to have whiffed. Oh, Ace Attorney. Mostly because I cook to it. Whenever I'm cooking, I cook to Ace Attorney a lot. But like the soundtracks of Ace Attorney these days is like I'm starting to like the soundtracks more than like the games, and I have a very like strong relationship with Ace Attorney. I love the series; it's my favorite game series of all time. But those soundtracks, those are something special. Whether it be like Apollo's theme or like the corner theme in Trials and Tribulations, or actually like I have a soft spot for kind of like some of the more unorthodox tracks like Trucy's theme or whatever. Like those songs that's good music, and the Japanese lyric version of Guilty Love. Those are good songs that I listen to all the time. And it's gotten to the point where it's like I think of the soundtracks more fondly than I do the games themselves, and that's saying a lot because I think of the games very fondly. Anyway, Evan, go.
If I were to pick a game that I bought because of the music, even though I was interested in the gameplay and the style, I actually think it'd be Persona 5, because I can't think of any other examples. The music in that game is just like so good, where you could hate that game like to death. I don't know how you could, but you could hate that game, but like I don't see how you could hate the music. You know, like that's very solid just to listen to on its own. And what was the second question? Like a game soundtrack that we liked?
Two or three game soundtracks that you hold close to your heart.
If I were to pick 3, I definitely think one would be Animal Crossing, because I love the music in that game so much, and it's just really nice and calm and chill, and it's just really great to listen to while doing like any sort of work. If I were to pick a second one, probably I think I consider Undertale and Cave Story to share like the same spot. If not, then Cave Story, I think its music is a little bit better, because despite having less songs, the quality of Cave Story's music is just really good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for 3 would just be like any Earthbound music or song. It's funny because I never beat any of the other games. I should.
Heresy.
But I know. But I really love like the music. Like Like I love. I can't think of the ones called. But I like the one being friends. I like the snowman song.
Pollyanna. Is
Yeah,
that the song you're thinking of?
maybe it was like the one I always selected as a stage. I'm pretty sure it was Pollyanna.
Could be. We can talk about that later.
Yeah. I love the Mother 3 Love theme like so much that never really gets old. Just like those sorts of songs are really good.
I actually have one more I wanted to bring up also.
Let's go for it.
Okay, so Minecraft as a kid, that was like a big one, of course.
Well, Minecraft
Yeah.
still has a nice enough piano
That's a-
track that works well as like both atmospheric and catchiness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Minecraft has really good songs.
When they play.
It's one of those
Yeah, I like that a
nostalgic
lot.
ones for me. Like when I go back and listen to it, it's like, oh yeah, I remember this. So yeah.
All right.
All right. I guess if we had 3 examples, I'd like to throw in my last one, which is Sonic Adventure. That song, unlike Sonic Adventure 2, which is still amazing, but Sonic Adventure 2 is mainly really focused on the guitar, and I love rock. Rock's my favorite genre, but Sonic Adventure 1 has an amazing array of variety in its songs. You have like the more somber tracks like E102 theme, which is really
Mystic Ruin.
Mystic Ruin is pretty good as well, but I'm more thinking like the character themes, like Gamma's theme. Gamma's theme is my favorite track in all of Sonic. I love Gamma's theme. And of course you got the butt rock with Sonic and Supersonic stuff. And
Yeah.
and you also got some of the really like more chill stuff like in Emerald Coast Act 2, stuff like that. Final Egg Act 1 is also really good. Stuff like that. I really love Sonic Adventure 1's soundtrack, and I think it's the best, most well-rounded soundtrack of all of them.
Yeah. Oh, I would need to listen to it, but
I man, I can go on and on about Sonic Adventure 1's tracks, like Red Mountain Act 2. Oh man, so good.
cool. All right. Well, that was a really good discussion, guys. Thank you for joining me. The last words I'll say is that jazz and Latin choirs are my favorite things in video games. And this has been Quest Clear Cast. This was our music OST episode, and that means that this quest is clear. Thanks for coming, everyone.